There are moments when your entire world stops. When everything you've built, every deal, every alliance, every carefully constructed piece of power, becomes completely irrelevant. When the only thing that matters is a voice on the other end of a phone line telling you something you never wanted to hear. I got that call at 4 in the afternoon. Tuesday. I was in a meeting. Discussing business. Numbers on paper. The kind of conversation that usually requires my full attention. The phone rang. My secretary knew better than to interrupt unless it was urgent. I picked up. "It's about your daughter," the voice said. One of my people. Breathing hard. Trying to stay calm and failing. "Sir, you need to know, she's okay. She's safe now." But something happened. My hand tightened on the phone. My face didn't change. I'd learned decades ago how to keep my expression neutral no matter what I was hearing. But inside, everything had shifted. Everything had become about one thing and one thing only. "Tell me," I said. 15 men. Italians. They cornered her after school. Surrounded her in an alley near 142nd Street. They didn't touch her, we got there before that. But they wanted her to know they could have. They wanted to send you a message. The room I was sitting in, the people across from me discussing percentages and territories, all of it faded. Became background noise. Became irrelevant. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Safe house on 155th. 3 of our people with her. She's shaken but unhurt." The 15 men? They scattered when we showed up. We identified most of them. Low-level operators. Genovese associates. Someone sent them, but they're claiming they were just following orders. I stood up. The meeting I'd been in stopped. People looked at me, reading something in my posture even though my face remained calm. "Get me a list," I said into the phone. "Every name. Every face. Everyone who was in that alley. And find out who sent them. I want to know within the hour." I hung up. Looked at the men I'd been meeting with. "We're done for today," I said. "Something's come up." They didn't ask questions. They just left, quickly. Because they could tell from the way I was standing, the way I was holding myself, that something fundamental had shifted. My daughter's name was Ruth. 16 years old. Smart. Beautiful. Everything a father could want. I'd kept her as far from my world as possible. She went to a good school. Had normal friends. Lived with her mother in a house I owned in a quiet neighborhood where my business never touched. She knew what I did. Generally. But I'd worked hard to make sure she never saw it. Never felt it. Never had to think about the fact that her father operated in a world where violence and intimidation were daily realities. I'd built walls between my world and hers. Tall walls. Strong walls. Walls I thought were solid enough to keep her safe from the consequences of who I was. And 15 men had just proven those walls weren't as solid as I'd believed. Within 30 minutes, I had the list. 15 names. 15 faces. Most of them young. Mid-20s. The kind of men who do what they're told without thinking about long-term consequences. The kind who see an order from above as an opportunity to prove themselves. But someone had given that order. Someone had decided that cornering a 16-year-old girl, my daughter, was an acceptable way to send me a message. That's what I needed to know. Who made that decision? Who thought that was a smart move? Who believed they could touch my family and walk away? My people were already working on it. Making calls. Asking questions. Applying pressure to the kinds of sources who usually know things. And I was getting answers. Pieces of information that were starting to form a picture. The 15 men had been sent by a mid-level captain in the Genovese organization. A man named Anthony Russo. He'd been having territorial disputes with some of my operations. Small things. The usual friction that happens when businesses overlap. Nothing that warranted this kind of escalation. But Anthony had decided to send a message. To show me that he could reach into my personal life if I didn't back down on our business disagreements. To prove that being Bumpy Johnson didn't make my family untouchable. He'd miscalculated. Badly. And he was about to learn exactly how badly that I went to see Ruth. The safe house was secure. Quiet. 3 of my most trusted people standing watch. But when I walked in and saw her sitting on the couch, her school uniform still on, her face showing fear she was trying to hide, something inside me went cold. Not angry. Not hot. Cold. The kind of cold that happens when emotion transforms into absolute clarity about what needs to happen next. "Daddy," she said when she saw me. And her voice broke. Because she'd been holding herself together until I got there, and now she didn't have to anymore. I sat next to her. Put my arm around her. Let her cry against my shoulder for as long as she needed. And while she cried, I was calculating. Planning. Deciding exactly how the next 6 hours would unfold. "Did they hurt you?" I asked when she was ready to talk. "No," she said. "They just surrounded me. Told me to tell you that they could get to me anytime they wanted. That I should ask you to be more reasonable about business." "Did they say who sent them?" She shook her head. "They just said it was a message. That you'd understand." I did understand. I understood perfectly. And understanding meant knowing exactly what had to happen next. "You're going to stay here tonight," I said. "With people I trust. And tomorrow, you're going to go back to school. Back to your normal life. Because nothing is going to change for you. You understand? This doesn't touch your life. This doesn't make you afraid to walk home. This doesn't make you think about my business when you should be thinking about your homework." "But Daddy." "Nothing changes for you," I repeated. "Because the men who did this are going to learn something tonight. They're going to learn that touching you was the worst mistake they'll ever make. And when they learn that lesson, everyone else will learn it too. And you'll never have to think about this again." She looked at me. Trying to read my face. Trying to understand what I meant. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "What needs to be done," I said. "But you don't think about it. You don't worry about it. You just know that it's handled. That you're safe. That no one will ever put their hands on you or make you feel afraid again." I left the safe house at 6 p.m. 2 hours after the call. 2 hours of gathering information, making plans, and setting things in motion. The 15 men who'd cornered Ruth were scattered across the city. Some had gone home. Some were at bars. Some were at their regular posts doing their regular jobs. They thought the incident was over. Thought they'd delivered their message and now they could go back to normal life. They were wrong. I divided them into 3 groups in my mind. The 5 who'd been the ringleaders, the ones who'd spoken to Ruth directly, who'd made the threats. The 7 who'd been there supporting but not leading. And the 3 who'd stood at the edges, probably not wanting to be there but too afraid to refuse the order. Each group would be handled differently. Because justice isn't one size fits all. It's calibrated. Precise. Matched to the level of offense. By 7 p.m. 3 hours after the initial call, my people were in motion. Not loudly. Not obviously. Just moving into position. Watching. Waiting for the signal. The first 5 men were the priority. The ones who'd spoken to my daughter. Who'd frightened her. Who'd thought cornering a 16-year-old girl was acceptable behavior. At 8 p.m., the first one disappeared. His name was Tommy Moretti. 26 years old. He was at a bar in Little Italy, drinking with friends, probably bragging about what he'd done that afternoon. Two of my people walked in. Sat near him. Waited until he went to the bathroom. When he came out the back door for a cigarette, they were there. No scene. No noise. Just a quiet conversation. Then a car. Then gone. His friends waited for him to come back from the bathroom for 20 minutes before they started wondering where he'd gone. By 9 p.m., 3 more of the 5 ringleaders had vanished. One from his apartment. One from a card game. One from a girlfriend's place. Each time, it was quiet. Professional. No witnesses who could say exactly what happened. Just men who were there one moment and gone the next. The 5th ringleader was named Marco Esposito. He was smarter than the others. Or more paranoid. By the time my people reached his location, he'd already heard that his friends were missing. He'd locked himself in his apartment. Called his captain, Anthony Russo, and asked for help. Anthony told him to sit tight. That someone would come get him. That he was protected. At 10 p.m., 6 hours after the phone call that changed everything, my people knocked on Marco's door. He didn't answer. Called out asking who it was. "We're here from Mr. Russo," one of my people said. "He sent us to bring you somewhere safe." Marco hesitated. But he was scared. And Anthony had said someone would come. So he opened the door. The apartment was on the 4th floor. When my people left 5 minutes later, Marco wasn't with them. And when his neighbors checked his apartment the next morning because his door had been left open, he wasn't there either. Just an empty apartment. His wallet and keys on the counter. His jacket on the chair. But no Marco. Like he'd simply ceased to exist. By 11 p.m., the 7 supporting members of the group were getting nervous. Word had spread. The way word always spreads in our world, that the 5 ringleaders couldn't be found. That they'd all disappeared within hours of each other. That no one knew where they were or what had happened. Some of the 7 tried to run. Left the city. Headed for other states where they had family or friends. But I'd anticipated that. Had people watching. Following. Making sure that wherever they went, they brought their problem with them. Others tried to hide. Went to ground in safe houses or with relatives, thinking that if they could just stay invisible for a few days, whatever was happening would blow over. But you can't hide from something that's already found you. That knows where you sleep and who you care about and every place you might think to go. The 3 who'd stood at the edges, who'd been there but hadn't participated, I handled differently. They got a visit. Just a conversation. A quiet explanation that they had one chance to explain themselves. To tell me why they'd been in that alley. What they'd been thinking. 2 of them gave me useful information. Confirmed that Anthony Russo had ordered it. That it had been planned. That he'd specifically wanted my daughter targeted to send me a message. Those 2, I let go. With a warning. That if they ever came near my family again, if they ever even looked in my daughter's direction, there wouldn't be a conversation. Just disappearance. The 3rd one tried to lie. Tried to claim he didn't know who I was talking about. That he'd just been walking through the alley and happened to be there. That one disappeared too. By midnight, 8 hours after the call, but I'd promised 6, 14 of the 15 men were gone. Not dead. I want to be clear about that. Because this wasn't about killing. It was about something more permanent than death. It was about erasure. About making them cease to exist in the world they'd known. About removing them so completely that even their own families would eventually stop looking for them. Some were on boats heading to distant ports. Some were in basements of buildings I controlled, being prepared for transport. Some were already in other cities, being handed over to people who owed me favors and would make sure these men never came back to New York. But all of them were gone. Removed from their lives. From their positions. From their futures. And the 15th, the most important one, was about to join them. Anthony Russo. The man who'd given the order. The man who thought threatening my daughter was acceptable strategy. At 1 a.m., 6 hours and change after I'd learned what happened, I called him. He answered on the second ring. His voice was tense. Worried. He'd heard by now that his men were missing. That something was happening he didn't understand. "We need to talk," I said. And from the silence on the other end of the line, I knew he understood exactly what that meant. Anthony Russo arrived at the meeting place I'd specified. An abandoned warehouse in Red Hook. 2 a.m. He came alone. I'd insisted on that, but I could tell from his body language he was terrified. He should have been. "Bumpy," he said when he saw me standing in the shadows. "Look, we can talk about this. We can work something out." "We are working something out," I said. "Right now. The men who touched your daughter, I didn't tell them to scare her. I just said to send a message. They went too far. I'll handle them. I'll make it right." "They're already handled," I said. "All 14 of them. Gone. Removed from the board. The question now is what happens to you." His face went pale. "Gone? What does that mean, gone?" "It means exactly what it sounds like. They don't exist anymore. Not in New York. Not in any life they used to have. They're ghosts now. And ghosts don't come back." I stepped closer. Let him see my face in the dim light. Let him see that I wasn't angry. Wasn't emotional. Just absolutely certain about what was going to happen next. "You ordered 15 men to corner my 16-year-old daughter," I said. "You thought that was smart strategy. That it would make me back down on some minor business dispute. That I'd choose compromise over consequences." "I made a mistake," Anthony said quickly. "I see that now. It was wrong. It was. It was a choice," I interrupted. "And choices have consequences. You wanted to teach me that my family could be touched. Now I'm going to teach you what happens when someone actually tries." "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was shaking now. "Money? Territory? I'll give you whatever you want. Just tell me what makes this right." "Nothing makes this right," I said. "But something makes it finished." Anthony Russo didn't die that night. That would have been too simple. Too clean. Death ends things. I wanted something that continued. I wanted him erased. By morning, Anthony's businesses were shutting down. His bank accounts were frozen through connections I had in legitimate finance. His properties were being seized for tax irregularities that materialized overnight. His protection from his own family evaporated when they learned what he'd done, what consequences he'd brought down on himself. Within 24 hours, Anthony Russo ceased to be a captain in the Genovese organization. Ceased to be a businessman. Ceased to be anything except a cautionary tale. I gave him 2 choices. Disappear completely, leave New York, change his name, never come back. Or stay and face what was coming, which would be much worse than leaving. He chose to leave. Got on a bus to Chicago that same night. No money. No connections. No future except what he could build starting from nothing in a city where nobody knew his name. And I made sure nobody would know it. Made sure that anyone he tried to contact from his old life got the message: Anthony Russo doesn't exist anymore. Don't take his calls. Don't acknowledge him. Don't give him any path back to what he used to be. Within a week, the story had spread through every organization in New York. 15 men had cornered Bumpy Johnson's daughter. 6 hours later, all 15 were gone. Vanished. Removed so completely that even their families couldn't find them. And the man who'd ordered it? Erased. Wiped from the board like he'd never existed. The message was clear. Bumpy Johnson's family was untouchable. Not because he'd say so. Not because he'd threaten it. But because the last people who'd tried to touch them had simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way. My daughter went back to school the next week. Walked the same streets. Lived her same life. And nobody, not one person, ever approached her inappropriately again. Not because they feared I'd kill them. Because they feared something worse. They feared I'd make them disappear. Remove them so completely from their lives that even their own mothers would eventually stop looking for them. 15 men in 6 hours. None of them could be found. And everyone who heard that story learned the same lesson: there are lines you don't cross. And Bumpy Johnson's family is the brightest line of all.